There was once a boy so poor, so broken, so completely alone, that the world had already forgotten him before he even had a chance to begin. But that boy went on to make the entire world laugh. And the most painful part? He himself was never truly happy. This is the story of Charlie Chaplin. My wonderful friends, welcome. Today I am going to share with you one of the most extraordinary life stories ever lived on this earth. A story that will teach you about pain, about courage, about dreams that refuse to die even when everything around them is burning. The man we are talking about today was not simply an actor. He was not simply a comedian. He was a force of nature, a soul so powerful that even now, nearly 50 years after his death, his films still play, his name still echoes, and his spirit still walks among us. His name was Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin, but the whole world knew him, loved him, and will forever remember him as Charlie Chaplin. And my friends, his story is not just a story for your heart. It is also perfect for growing your English. Every word, every sentence in today's video has been carefully chosen so that you can understand, learn, and improve. So please, stay with me from beginning to end, because this journey is going to take you somewhere powerful. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Charles Spencer Chaplin came into the world on April 16, 1889, in the city of London, England. His mother, Hannah Chaplin, was a singer and stage performer. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was also an entertainer who performed in theaters and music halls. On the surface, this may sound like a warm and creative home to grow up in. But the truth, my friends, was very different indeed. Charlie's father was a man who had surrendered himself to alcohol. He drank, and slowly he disappeared from the family's life. He did not die. He simply chose the bottle over his own children and walked away. Charlie was just a young boy when this happened. Left behind were his mother Hannah, young Charlie, and his older half-brother Sidney. And from that moment on, life became a daily fight for survival. They had almost nothing. There were days when there was not enough food for everyone at the table. There were nights when Hannah would pretend she was not hungry, but waited out home, just so that her sons could eat. They moved from one cramped room to another, always behind on rent, always one step away from being thrown into the street. Poverty was not something they visited. Poverty was where they lived. It was the walls around them, the cold beneath their feet, the silence at dinner time. But even inside all that darkness, young Charlie carried something bright, a sense of wonder, a love of watching people, and above everything else, he had his mother. Hannah Chaplin was a remarkable woman. Despite everything she faced, she still performed when she could. She still sang. She still tried. And little Charlie would go with her to the theater, sitting in the wings backstage, watching her with his wide, dreaming eyes. He studied the way the performers moved, the way they made people in the audience react with laughter or tears. Something was growing inside him, even if he could not name it yet. Then came the night that changed everything. Hannah was performing on stage when her voice gave way. She had been unwell, and suddenly, in front of a paying audience, her voice simply stopped working. She struggled. The crowd grew restless. People began to shout. It was humiliating, heartbreaking, and dangerous. And then a small boy, no more than 5 years old, walked out onto that stage. Charlie stood in front of the audience, looked out at the sea of faces, and began to perform. He sang, he moved, he did impressions, he made them laugh. And the audience, which moments ago had been ready to walk away, fell completely in love with this tiny child. Coins rained onto the stage. The crowd cheered, And somewhere in that little boy, a fire was permanently lit. This was the first time Charlie Chaplin ever performed. And from that night, he understood something that would guide the rest of his life. He had the gift to make people feel things. But pain, my friends, was not finished with Charlie yet. Hannah's health continued to fall apart. Her mind began to slip. The struggles, the poverty, the loneliness, they had taken too great a toll. She was eventually taken to a mental hospital. And just like that, Charlie and Sydney were alone in the world. Truly, completely alone. Two young boys with no parents, no money, and no home. They were placed in workhouses, cold, gray buildings where the poor were sent to sleep and work in exchange for meals. Charlie was separated from his brother and sent to live among strangers. He was small, he was frightened, but he held on to one thing: the memory of that stage, the memory of that audience, the memory of that feeling. Stay with me now, because this next part of his journey is truly something. Despite everything, despite the hunger and the cold and the years of being shuffled from one miserable place to another, Charlie Chaplin never let go of his dream. When he was old enough to move freely, he began looking for any chance to perform. He washed dishes, he ran errands, he sold newspapers. He did whatever he had to do just to get through each day. But always, he was watching other performers, studying them, memorizing their rhythms, their timing, their expressions. He joined a group of street entertainers and began performing for crowds in public squares. People walked past, then a few stopped, then more. Then he began to make them laugh, and each time he felt that laughter ripple through a crowd, it was like medicine for everything he had suffered. At 14, Charlie earned his first real professional opportunity. He was taken on by a traveling performance group called the 8 Lancashire Lads. It was not a starring role. He was one face among many. But Charlie treated this opportunity as if it were the most important thing in the world, because for him, it was. He practiced harder than anyone else. He arrived earlier. He stayed later. He absorbed every skill around him like water into dry ground. People began to notice. By the time Charlie was 16, he had been cast in a stage production of Sherlock Holmes. He was no longer performing on street corners. He was on a proper theatrical stage, in front of a real audience, playing a real character. The response was extraordinary. Directors saw something in him that they could not quite explain. A physical intelligence, an ability to communicate emotion without words, a natural magnetism that the camera would later love completely. And then, in 1910, America came calling. Charlie was invited to join a touring comedy company called Fred Karno's Troupe, which was traveling to the United States to perform. This was enormous. America was where the future was being written. Charlie packed everything he owned, boarded a ship, and crossed the ocean toward his destiny. When he arrived in America, everything felt different. The energy, the scale, the ambition, it all matched something inside him. And then he discovered Hollywood. In 1913, a film studio called Keystone saw Charlie Chaplin perform and immediately signed him to make films. It was not a grand beginning. He was given small parts and limited creative control. But Charlie had a vision, a very specific vision, of the kind of character he wanted to bring to life. He put on a pair of oversized trousers. He found a jacket one size too tight. He selected a small round hat. He drew on a little rectangular mustache. He picked up a cane, and then he walked. That walk, that unforgettable, waddling, shuffling human walk that somehow captured the dignity and the stubbornness of every ordinary person who has ever refused to be beaten by life. The character was called the Tramp, and the world had never seen anything like him. At first, audiences were curious. Then they were amused. Then they were completely, totally devoted. The tramp was everybody. He was the poor man who still held his chin up. He was the dreamer who kept falling down and kept getting back up. He was Charlie himself, dressed in comedy, carrying decades of real pain beneath every pratfall and every silly glance at the camera. By 1917, Charlie Chaplin was the most famous human being on the planet. Not in Hollywood, not in America, on the planet. His face was on posters from London to Tokyo. His films played in every language, every country, every culture. Studios were fighting over him. The money being offered to him was extraordinary. But Charlie was not satisfied with just performing. He wanted to create. He wanted control over every element. The story, the camera angles, the music, the lighting, the editing. He wanted to make films the way he saw them in his mind, without anyone telling him what was and was not allowed. So in 1918, he did something almost unheard of for an actor at that time. He built his own studio, Chaplin Studios. He became his own producer, his own director, his own everything. Now there were no barriers between his imagination and the audience. And in 1921, he released what many still consider his greatest achievement, a film called The Kid. It was the story of a poor, homeless man who discovers an abandoned baby and raises the child as his own. It was funny, but it was also devastating. It was also real. It carried inside it everything Charlie had lived: the cold workhouses, the separation from his mother, the hunger, the longing for someone to belong to. People laughed, and then people wept, and when they left the theater, they felt as though they had been changed by what they had seen. This was what Charlie understood that few others did, that real comedy always lives next door to real sadness. Through the 1920s, Charlie continued to produce extraordinary work. He was earning more money than almost anyone in the entertainment world. And yet he never forgot what it felt like to be the boy searching through discarded food in the streets of London. That memory lived in him always. It made him work harder. It made him more careful, more precise, more committed to making every film as perfect as it could possibly be. And then the world changed around him. In the late 1920s, a new technology arrived in Hollywood: talking pictures. For the first time, actors could speak on screen. The silent film era was coming to an end. Everyone told Charlie to make the transition. Everyone told him that the tramp must speak. Charlie refused. He believed, and he was right, that true emotion does not need words. He believed that a human face, expressing something genuine and honest, could communicate more in 1 second than 1,000 spoken lines. And in 1931, he proved it. He released a film called City Lights. It was a silent film, made during the age of talking pictures, and it was a masterpiece. The final scene, in which the tramp sees again a flower girl whose sight has been restored, is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the history of cinema. You do not need subtitles. You do not need dialogue. You only need to watch his face. But Charlie was not only a filmmaker. He was a human being who watched the world, and he was watching something deeply troubling rise in Europe. By the late 1930s, a man named Adolf Hitler had taken power in Germany and was building a machine of hatred and destruction. And Charlie noticed something absurd and ironic. Hitler wore the same small rectangular mustache that the tramp had made famous. The same mustache that Charlie had chosen as a comic detail had become the symbol of a tyrant. Charlie decided to respond. In 1940, he released The Great Dictator, his first film with spoken dialogue. It was a sharp, biting, courageous satire of Hitler and everything he represented. And at the end of the film, Charlie stepped forward and delivered a speech. As himself, not as any character. A speech calling on the people of the world to choose kindness over hatred, reason over violence, and humanity over machinery. That speech is still watched by millions of people today. It is one of the most powerful statements ever made by any artist. But power makes enemies, and Charlie had accumulated both. Those who felt threatened by his independence and his political courage began working against him. Accusations were made, stories were spread, and in 1952, when Charlie traveled to England for the premiere of his latest film, the American government revoked his permission to return. He was effectively exiled from the country where he had built his career and spent most of his adult life. It was a devastating blow. Charlie did not fight it publicly. He took his family, his beloved wife Una, and their children, and settled in Switzerland. He lived there quietly for the next 25 years, writing, walking in his garden, playing with his children, and occasionally watching his old films with a distant, thoughtful smile. He had found with Una the love that had always eluded him. She was decades younger than him. Many people questioned the relationship, but Una was steadfast, devoted, and completely his. Together they built a life of warmth and calm, 8 children, a beautiful home, and a peace that Charlie had not known since before his mother first lost her mind. On Christmas Day 1977, Charlie Chaplin died quietly in his sleep. He was 88 years old. The world paused. There is no other way to describe it. From every country, in every language, people found ways to say, "We have lost something irreplaceable." And then, as if real life had decided to add one final, dark, absurd chapter worthy of the man himself, something shocking happened. Several months after his burial, criminals broke into his grave and stole his body. They demanded a ransom from his family. Una refused to pay. She said, very quietly, that Charlie would have found the whole thing rather ridiculous. The thieves were eventually caught. The body was recovered, and this time, it was reburied beneath a thick layer of concrete so that the world could no longer disturb his rest. Even in death, Charlie Chaplin was at the center of a story that seemed impossible. My friends, what do we take from a life like this? What do we carry away from everything he endured and everything he created? Perhaps this, that your circumstances at the beginning are never your sentence, that the boy who begs in the street can still become the person who changes the world. That suffering, when you refuse to let it destroy you, can become the very source of your greatest creativity. That laughter and tears are not opposites. They are the same feeling, reaching toward the same truth. Charlie Chaplin started with absolutely nothing. He lost his mother, his home, his country, his reputation, more than once. And yet he gave the world something it had never had before and will never entirely replace. The image of one small, stubborn, beautiful human being, holding his chin up, twirling his cane, and walking on. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if it made you want to keep going no matter what your own life is throwing at you right now, then you belong here. Come and join us at Wisdom Loom English, where every week we bring you stories exactly like this one. True, powerful, and full of the kind of English that actually matters. Hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because one thing Charlie Chaplin proved beyond any doubt, the best stories are always worth staying for.